cross-talking some real news. I'm joined by my guest here in Moscow, Dmitry Babich. He's a political analyst and editor at InnosMe, Internet Media Project. And in London, we cross to Marcus Papadopoulos. He is editor of Politics First magazine. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Let me go to Marcus first in London. As this pandemic continues, and there's no end in sight, different countries are experiencing different levels of this pandemic. And there's been pointed out by the media and by people around the world what actions work and what don't work. But there's a much broader discussion that needs to be taken, and that is the nature of globalization and how globalization has allowed a pandemic like this to spread, become a pandemic itself here. And when I say globalization, I'm talking about the nature of trade, borders, the very nature of the nation state, and even talking about sovereignty again, which is forbidden on both sides of the spectrum. But it's something that has to be talked about because at the end of the day, the nation state is required to take care of its own citizens. Your reflection there. Go ahead, Marcus.
Indeed, Peter. One of the consequences of the emergence of the coronavirus has been to shine a light on the dangers of globalization. And that is something, of course, that Western media, principally American media and British media, is not going to discuss. Because globalization is a very dangerous phenomenon. And at the same time, the coronavirus has demonstrated the importance of borders, of security, of nation states. And incidentally, in Britain and America, the word border, along with the words culture and religion, are regarded as dirty words, which is not just idiocy, but it is absolutely laughable. Now, will the coronavirus result in the downfall of globalization, in the downfall of the New World Order, which has been in existence since the end of the Soviet Union and of Soviet communism? I believe not. Why? Firstly, because there is an assumption that the ordinary man and woman in the West, principally in Britain and America, has made the connection between the emergence of and the spread of the coronavirus and globalization, and in the case of the European Union, without borders. So that is a dangerous assumption. The second reason why I do not believe it will result in the end of globalization is that there is no alternative to globalization. Ever since the end of Soviet communism, capitalism has manifested itself today, has evolved in itself today to corporate capitalism. And one of the dimensions of corporate capitalism is, of course, globalization. So there is no alternative in the world.
That's a very interesting comment, Dima. I mean, I'm not suggesting that globalization is going to go away because of the coronavirus. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, taking on board what Marcus just said, is that we have to take note of its weaknesses and how it needs to be adjusted. I don't think we can turn the clock back 40 years, okay? No. But at the same time, this horrible event that is affecting the world on a scale that is only increasing, and and later in this week on this program, we're going to talk about the economic consequences of it. But it does beg the question: is it really working that well, and what needs to be adjusted so we can avoid such a pandemic? Because there will be other pandemics. This is a test case on how to leverage what we have now and what needs to be done in the future. Go ahead.
Well, I agree with Marcus that the nature of modern capitalism is expansion. Expansion in everything, not only in territory. For example, a lot of people blame for the coronavirus the eating habits of the Chinese. But didn't we hear from the Western experts that we should consume insects, we should change our food patterns, we should expand the sphere where humans interfere with nature? Basically, it's becoming more or less clear that this virus was was a result of human interference in nature. It was not produced by nature itself. So we see how this system is fragile, because not only is it affected by destruction, the stop in the spread, the stop in expansion is already a tragedy. People are losing money, industries stop. This system is vulnerable.
But let me go back to Marcus. I guess maybe to fine-tune my comment, introductory comments, that is that we have globalization, and that's a very broad brush, but I think Dima's teasing a little bit of what I'm talking about here. I mean, this is a corporatization globalization, because when countries have to react to this pandemic, they have, all of them have a different toolbox, and they're not necessarily connected, and we've seen today the inability to contain it. I mean, globalization in a very broad sense would seem to suggest that, but we don't have that because it's more of a corporate-driven globalization. Go ahead, Marcus.
Well, let me make a case in point, Peter. Look at Russia. Russia has borders and rigorously defended borders. Look at the decisive steps that the Russian authorities took to confront and contain the coronavirus. Once it had spread from China, straight away the Russian authorities took the responsible decision and closed its borders. And if the European Union, and if Britain, now that Britain is out of the European Union, had proper borders, if they had properly secure and defended borders, then maybe, Peter, maybe there would not be the situation that there is today in, for example, Italy and Germany and Britain regarding the coronavirus. So I believe that the Russian authorities have demonstrated the absolute necessity of having borders.
Okay, Marcus, let me ask you a question then. So you're telling me, I'm extrapolating from what you just said, is that Western elites and their vision of globalization, their ideology trumps public safety. Is that what you're telling me?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, good. That's what I'm thinking as well.
Absolutely. Let me expand on that, Peter. Who has been one of the beneficiaries of the coronavirus? Western media. Because Western media should have created an atmosphere of awareness and calm about the coronavirus. They should have told the British public, the American public, that a new virus has emerged. It is potentially fatal. It could become a pandemic, but you must remain calm and you must put it into perspective, because year in, year out, for well over 100 years now, the world has been living with a pandemic in the form of influenza. That would have been the actions of a responsible media. But alas, British mainstream media and American mainstream media did not do that. They deliberately created an atmosphere.
They flamed it. Inflamed it.
And yes, and what has happened, Peter? In Britain, for example, the sale of newspapers has increased. The amount of clicks on newspaper websites has up. Advertising space in newspapers.
So let me go to Dima here. So exactly. So Dima, so even the business model for media trumps public safety. Okay, we could go on and on and on. Go ahead, Dima.
Well, I can just give you an example. The Hill, an American publication, they published an article. U.S. paints a murky picture of Russian disinformation of coronavirus. So Russia deliberately misinformed the U.S. public about coronavirus.
But the article in itself is misinformation.
Well, the article quotes Assistant Secretary of State for Europe and Eurasia, Philip Rieker, saying Russia's intent is to sow discord and undermine U.S. institutions and alliances from within, including through covert and coercive malign influence campaign. By spreading disinformation about coronavirus, Russian malign actors are once again...
Is that one example cited in the article that you could find of misinformation, Dima?
As usual, they cite a report which is classified. The public cannot see it. They are not providing any evidence, any facts. But that's not an individual case. It's not a separate case. In Europe, Der Spiegel magazine, they publish an article headlined, "When Coronavirus Meets Putin Crisis." Putin is Putin and Erdogan. So they accuse Putin and Erdogan of weaponizing migration globalization, driving huddled masses to Europe. Immediately it reminded me of a headline in The Economist a few years ago: let the huddled masses in. And now Der Spiegel says it's Putin and Erdogan who are sending all this.
But there's, Marcus, if you've been listening to that, I mean, there's no self-reflection of the malign foreign intervention into Arab lands, Muslim countries that created these migration waves in the first place. This is just how myopic Western media is. That their countries create these problems, their media blames these problems on a third party that wasn't involved in it in the first place. I mean, it is so circular, so self-satisfying, and again, a business model that praises ideology over the public welfare of people. Go ahead, Marcus.
Absolutely, Peter. The world is witness to the emergence of a new virus. It can be fatal. It could become a pandemic, but we have to see it in perspective. Since the beginning of 2020, 15 million Americans have fallen victim to influenza. A few years ago in Britain, in the winter from 2017 to 2018, 50,000 British people died from the flu. So we have to be aware about the coronavirus. We have to adhere to basic hygiene behavior. For example, washing your hands thoroughly after the toilet, or when you come back from the shops or from a bar or from a restaurant. But I am not going to let British mainstream media, which is a pathological lying outfit, create fear and panic in my mind. After all, these are the people who claim that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. These are the people who claim that mass murder had been committed in Bosnia and in Libya and in Kosovo. They are compulsive liars, and they do it deliberately in order to achieve a financial win for themselves. They are despicable creatures.
Yeah, and you know what the biggest loser is, as we end this segment here, is public confidence in the end in the media itself. It's a circular, vicious circle here. Marcus Papadopoulos, thank you for joining us in London. We're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on some real news. Stay with RT.